Hello YouTube, my name is Daniel and welcome back to another Android series. In this series of videos I'm going to be developing a simple notes app in Kotlin. This app will allow you to create new notes, update existing notes and then delete notes. It also has a drag and drop feature where we can drag notes from the Recyclerview onto this bin down here. A dialog will come up and you can just select yes and then the notes will be removed from the Recyclerview and deleted from our DB. To add a new note, we just click on this fab icon here and we just provide a title, so test and then test for the body of the note, click add note and there it appears in our Recyclerview. We can then click this here and we can change the text if we want to and it will get updated in our DB. For the first iteration of these videos, I'm going to be developing this app in a legacy style so you guys have more experience with older technologies. So I'll be building this with a SQLite DB and an XML layout. In future iterations, I'll be converting this app to use RoomDB and Jetpack Compose for the UI. So that's it for the introduction and let's get on with the coding. So firstly, I'm just going to be adding a few colors into our color XML. The full project for this is on GitHub and I'll post a link in the description so you guys can copy these without having to type them out. So I'm just going to copy in these two colors and now we're just going to get on with the layout. So this is just a blank Android project. You won't need any external dependencies to create this app. So next step, I'm just going to create a empty activity to allow us to have the layout file. So just right click on new on your main project and come down to activity and then select empty activity. Main activity and activity main is fine, just click finish and we can see here that's gone ahead and created our layout folder and our activity main file. So I'm going to be doing this in code because the visual editor can be a bit annoying sometimes. So firstly we're going to add our floating action button and for the height and width we're going to be using wrap content and we want to constrain this bottom to the parent and end to the parent. So constraint bottom to bottom of parent. And end to end of parent. ID is going to be called notes underscore fab. And we're going to add a margin bottom of 32 dp. And a margin end of 24 dp. Background tint is going to be color design default color underscore primary. So just that blue color there. And then before we carry on, I'm just going to add some images into our drawable directory. Again, these will be in the project code and the link will be in the description. So for the images, I just have this bin JPEG here to show the full bin when we've deleted an item. And then we have an empty bin here for when no items have been deleted and just an add icon here for the fab. And then we can add this in, so that will be Android source and the icon is IC action underscore add. Next we'll have our bin image. This is just going to be a image view. The height and width is going to be 100 dp. Margin bottom will be 32 dp. Scale type is going to be fit center. ID is going to be notes underscore bin. Source will be the bin image. And we're going to constrain this bottom to bottom of the fab button. Top to top of the fab button so it aligns in the middle and start to start of parent, so we want this to align on the left. Now we just need to define our Recyclerview The width for this is 0 dp because it's going to be using the constraints that we provide. And the height will be wrap content. And the constraints is end to end of parent, top to top of parent, and start to start of parent. And we just close the tag, and that's it for the main activity. So we can go to the design tab, and we see here that we have our bin image and our fab button, and also our Recyclerview at the top. So there's just a few things we need to change. Firstly, on our constraint layout, we need to add a background color, which will be notes view background. And then on our floating action button, we need to provide a background tint, which would be design color primary. And then we can remove this background XML attribute here, and that should set the correct color. So we can see here on design, we've got our Recyclerview up here, our bin image down here, and our floating action button. Now I'm going to go ahead and create that dialog. So on our layout folder, we'll right click and then select new layout resource file, and we're just going to call this notes_dialog. This will again be a constraint layout. The width of this layout will be match parent, and the height is going to be wrap content. And then the background, we want to be Android color darker gray. And we're also going to add some padding of 12 dp. Then outside our layout, the first element will be an edit text. The width is going to be 300 dp, and the height is going to be wrap content. And then we add a margin top of 16 dp, a background color of white, a hint which will be title, and we're just going to add that to our strings. Padding of 8 dp. The ID will be notes_dialog_title. And then for the constraints, it will be end to end of parent, start to start of parent, and top to top of parent. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and paste this, because we will need the one for the note body. The idea of this is going to be called notes_dialog_body. For the hint, we're just going to call it note. Margin top is going to stay the same, padding is going to stay the same. The height for this is going to be 150 dp, and the width is going to be 0. And then for constraints, it will be end to end of the notes dialog title, start to start of notes dialog title, and then this constraint here will be top to bottom of notes dialog title. And also we need to set the gravity to top. Then finally we just need to add our button. Height and width will be wrap content. Let's add a bit more space. Margin top will be 16. Margin bottom will be 16. The text will be add note. Then for the constraints, it will be bottom to bottom of parent. And then we're just going to constrain it to the note dialog body. So it'll be end to end of note dialog body, start to start. And top to bottom. And the ID for this will be notes underscore dialog underscore submit button. Then if we go into our design, we can see we have the dialog all looking the same way it was when the app was running. Then we just have one more layout file, which is the notes item to go into our Recyclerview. So new layout resource file, and I'm just going to call this note underscore list underscore item. And then we're just going to move into the code. Firstly, in the root of the layout, we want our width to be 120 dp, and the same for the height. Padding of 4 dp, and then some margin on the top and the left of 8 dp. And this is because we want a bit of space in between the notes. And we just need to add a background, which will be notes background. And here we just have two text views. So the first text view is going to be the title, and the width for this will be 0 dp, and the height will be wrap content. The text size will be 16 dp or SP. Text style of bold. The ID will be notes underscore list underscore item underscore title. Then for the constraints, it will be left to left of parent, right to right of parent, and top to top of parent. And next we just have the body of our note. So that will be another text view. The width will be 0 dp, and the height will be wrap content. The text size will be 18 SP. The text style will be bold. And the ID will be note underscore list underscore item underscore note. Then for the constraints, it will be end to end of parent, start to start of parent, and top to bottom of the note title. And if we want to add any text into these notes so we can just see it in the layout, we can use this by accessing the tools namespace. So in order to do that, we just need to type in tools and then the Android API you want to access. So we want to access text, and we're just going to put test for the body, and then we just need to add the declaration at the top, and then we're just going to do the same for the text view. And then we can see here we have test and then test for our title and body. So that's it for the layout files. We can now start on the actual code. So on your project structure, we want to start defining our packages. So for this app, we're going to have 4 packages in total, 1 for the adapter, 1 for the database, 1 for the dialog, and then 1 for the models. I'll be putting all the UI in the activity, but normally you should be using fragments if it's a larger app, but as it's just a single screen app, we might as well just be coding it into the activity rather than introducing a fragment. Right, so let's get these packages created. So the first package, the adapter, the second package, the models, then a package for our database, and finally a package for our dialogues. The first thing we're going to create is our model, which will be our note item, and that's because it is used throughout our whole app. So the dialog will take a note item, the database will be where we store all of our notes, and the adapter will be the list of our notes. So we can't really go much further until we create that note item. So right click on the models folder and select new Kotlin class/file. This will be a data class and it will be called note item. And this is going to contain all of the fields for our note. So firstly, we're going to need an ID to differentiate all of the notes in our database, and that will be an int. Next will be the title, which will be a string, and this could be null. So let's just put a null check in here. And then the body of the note, which we're just going to call notes. Again, this could be a nullable string. And then a timestamp for the note, just in case we wanted to keep track of the time when a note was created, or if we want to do any ordering of the notes. And that's it for our note item. We can now go ahead and create our database. So on our database folder, we want to right click and select new Kotlin class/file, and we will call this notes database. This class will have one parameter, which will be context, and this class will then extend SQLite open helper. And here we need to pass in the context, the database name, which we will fill in, and it will be a static variable, so I'm going to be putting this as capitals, the factory, which will be null, and the database version. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste in some code here, which contains the name of our table, the database, and also the create statement to get our database. So firstly, this is just a companion object, which contains all of our database details. So our database name, our table, our keys for our columns, so the ID, the title, the note, the timestamp, and then we just have a statement here to create our table. Then we just need to override the onUpgrade method, and in here we're just going to call the SQLite database, which is under PO, and then dot exec SQL, and then we're just going to pass in the drop table string. So drop table if exists, and then the table name. And then we just surround that with a null check. And now we can begin writing our DB functions. So I'm just going to add a bit more space into this class. And our first function is going to be add note. And we want these to be public so we can access these in our activity. And this is going to take a note item. And then we need a val for our DB to access the writable database. Now we need to define our content values, which will be the items that we're inserting into the DB. And it's essentially just like a hash map, so we can do content values.put and we can provide it a key. The first one will be title, and then the note item title will be the value. And we can just copy and paste this a few times. So the next key will be timestamp. And then we just need to change the values. And then finally the ID. And then we can call DB insert. I'm just going to store the result of this in a variable, and I'm going to call this variable result. So result db.insert table, which will be table name. The null column hat will be null, and then we just pass in our content values. And then whenever you access the DB, you need to make sure that you close it afterwards. So we're going to call db.close and then return our result. And then we just need to make sure that this function up here returns a long value. And that's it for our add note function. We can now move on to our edit function. And for that, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste, as the syntax is kind of similar. The function will be called edit note, and it's going to take a note, which will be a string, a title, which will be a string, and the ID of note, which will be an int. We still need the rival database. We still need the content values, but we only need the title and the note, as those are the only things that we're going to allow to be changed. You can't change the ID or the timestamp. And then for the query, this will be db.update. The same table, and we pass the content values, and then the where clause, which will be a string, and that will be underscore ID equals ID, which we pass as a parameter, and then the where args will be null. So what we're doing here is we're just passing our new title and our new note body, and we're saying wherever the ID of this note is in this database, then update this note with the new information. And this function doesn't return long, it returns an int, so we just need to change that up here. And that is it for the edit note function. Just add a bit more space. And the next function will be get notes. So this is getting a list of notes from our DB. and this will return an array list of note item. So firstly, I'm going to create a empty note list. And we just need to add this as a type. Yep, so we have our empty note list here. I'm just going to define my select query as well. Now I'll be select star from table. And our DB. And now we can start beginning our query to retrieve all of our notes, and we need to surround this in a try catch just in case we get a SQLite exception. And now we just need to create our cursor to go ahead and collect all of our values. So we db.raw query, pass in our SQL query here, and the selection args of null. And then if we do if cursor.move too fast, and now I'll move to the first column in our database. And then while the cursor is moving across the table, we're going to go ahead and create our note items. So that will be val note item. And then firstly for the ID, that will be cursor.getInt. And then we just pass in the column index. So cursor.get column index, and then key ID. We can copy and paste this 4 times. And then we have the title, the note, and the timestamp. And instead of getInt for this, it will be getString. And the same for the next two. And then we just need to pass in the different column indexes. So the first one will be title, and then the note, and the timestamp. And we just need to add in commas at the end of each of these to get rid of the errors. So that is our note. We then add the note to our note list that we created earlier. And we just need to add here while cursor.move to next. So this cursor is essentially moving across the table. Where it moves to the first column, we then create our note item from our column indexes, and then we move to the next one, and whilst we're doing that, we're adding it into the list. If we catch an exception, I'm just going to go ahead and print the stack trace. So e.print stack trace, and we will return an empty array list if this happens. And if it's successful, we will just return the note list. And also, once we're done with the cursor, we just need to make sure that we close it. So cursor.close. And our last function will be delete note. And that will take an ID, which will be an int. And then we need to access our database again. So val db list.writable database. And then for our query, we're going to call it result. And that will be db.delete, pass the table name, and then our where clause, which would be key underscore ID equals ID. The where args will be null, as before we defined it in the clause, and then db.close, and then finally return the result. And we just change the return type to an int, and that is our notes database created. And we can now go ahead and create our adapter. So on our adapter package, we want to right click and then go new Kotlin class / file, and I'm going to call this notes adapter. This will take two constructor arguments. Firstly, the list of notes, which will be a mutable list of notes item, and also a click listener, which we will define at the bottom of this class. The click listener will be an interface, and it's going to have one function called onClick, and the parameter for this will be a note item. And underneath here we can also define our list view holder, so that will be class list view holder. The constructor arguments will be an inflator and a view group. And this will extend Recyclerview view holder, and then we can pass in inflator inflate, and then the layout, so r.layout.note. If we just import the resource, so note underscore list item, then we pass the parent, and attached root will be false. Okay, and the reason this is failing is we need to pass in layout inflator and not inflator. And that should get rid of the error. And now we can start creating our notes adapter. The notes adapter will extend Recyclerview.adapter. And then we need to pass in our view holder. And then we're going to override some methods here. So on create view holder, on bind, and get item count. get item count. It's super easy. It's just going to return the size of the list. Create view holder. We just need to define our inflator. So layout inflator dot from and then parent dot context. And then we just return our view holder, which we created on the bottom of this class. And then for the bind is where we're actually going to create our note list item. So we're not going to be using view bind in this project. We're taking it proper old school and we're going to be using find view by ID. So we're going to firstly create our note item, which will be list and then position. And now we're going to define the item view, which will be holder.item view. And now we can define our views. So firstly we have the title text, which should be item view.find view by ID. Type is text view, and the ID is r.id.note list item title, and we can copy that line, and this one will be our note, and I'm going to call that note text. Now we just need to set our text. So title text dot text equals note item dot title, and then one more time note text dot text note item dot note. And now we can set our long click listener, which will define the drag data. So when we drag the item, we want to have some certain data that comes along with it, which will be the note ID. So when that item gets dragged and then dropped onto the bin, we can then get that ID from the item that was dragged and then use that to delete the note. So item view dot set on long click listener. The item view is the whole view of that specific item. So no matter what part of the note they click on, they'll be clicking on the item view. And then we need to define our clip data. And this will be the data that we'll be accessing when the item has been dropped. So note item.id.toString. And at the bottom of this, we just need to return true. So I'm just going to put that here now. And then to pass this data after it's been dragged, we need to put it inside clip data. So I'm going to call this item. And this will be an instance of clip data.item. And then we can pass in the clip data. And next we need to define the meme types, which is the type of data that we're going to be passing. And now it needs to be an array. And it's just going to have one element, which will be clip description dot meme type, and that will just be text underscore plain. And then we need to put this all together in one clip data item. So clip data, then we pass in the text, meme types, and the item. Now we need to define the drag shadow builder, and what that does is creates the effect. So when we click on a note, we have this shadow effect when we're dragging it. So I'll just show you that now. So you can see this shadow of the note here. So that will be val drag shadow builder equals view dot drag shadow builder Then we need to just pass it, which is the item view. And now we can call it dot start drag and drop. And we pass our clip data, the builder, the item view, and any flags. And to get rid of that error, we just need to add, this requires API annotation, and it's just saying that we need at least API level 24 for this to run. So when the user clicks the item view normally, we want to open that edit dialog. So in order to do that, we need to set a normal click listener, and we just need to call click listener .onClick and then pass in the note item, and that will open our dialog with our main activity. And that is it for our recycler view. We can now go ahead and create our dialog. So on our dialog package, we just need to right click and then new, and then Kotlin class / file. This will be called note dialog. So notes dialog is going to take two constructor arguments. The first one being a note listener, which we will define at the bottom of this class. And that is just a listener which our activity will use to know when the dialog is closed and note has been updated or added into the database. So that will be note listener. And the class for this will be called add note listener. And then the second argument will be a note item, and this could be null. And the reason this could be null is if there isn't a note item, then we know we're going to be in create mode, so we're creating a new note. And if there is a note item, we know we're going to be in edit mode, where we'll be editing the note. So firstly, I'm just going to define that add note listener now. So this will be another interface, and it's going to have two functions. The first function will be add note, and I will take a note item, and next will be edit note. And this is going to take three parameters. Firstly, the body of the note, the title, and also the ID. And now we can go ahead and start building our dialog. And we just need to extend dialog fragment. And now we can override on create view. And firstly, we just want to define a variable up here to say whether we are in edit mode or not. And I'm just going to set that to false. Now firstly, I'm just going to define my root view, so we can access this and then use the find view by ID to get our other views. And that will be layout inflator dot inflate dot layout, and then we just need to import the resource, and that will be notes underscore dialog, and now we just pass the container and then false for attach to root. We just need to get rid of this and return the root view. Now we've defined our root view, we can now start defining our other views within the dialog. So firstly, we have our button, which will be root view dot find view by ID. The type is button, and the ID is r.id dot notes underscore dialog underscore submit button. Copy and paste this twice to get the other views. First view will be note title. There's an edit text. And then note text. Then replace the button for edit text, and then notes dialog underscore body. Now we just want to check whether we have a note passed in our constructor. So that will be note item, and we're going to access it with .let, and this will check whether it's null, and if it isn't null, we want to put edit mode to true. The note title will then be the note title passed in the constructor. So that'll be it.title. And then the text we can also add here. So it.note. And then also we want to set the button text to save. And I'm just going to add this into our strings. And then for the last part of this class, we need to define our click listener. So that would be button.set and click listener. And then firstly, we just want to check whether the user actually put any text in the title or even the body. So that will be if note text.text.toString is empty, or note title.text.toString is empty. We will show a toast. And just a warning message saying please provide a note title and a note body. This will just be a short toast. And don't forget to call .show. And then if this is the case, we just return out of the click listener. Next, we just want to check if we're in edit mode and that the note is not null. And that will be the note item. So if we're in this scenario and they've clicked on the button, we know we're in edit mode. So we want to call the edit note listener. So note listener dot edit note, and then we pass in the note text to string, and then the title, and then the ID, and then we also at this stage want to return out of the click listener. And before that, we want to close the dialog, which will be activity dot support fragment manager dot begin transaction, remove this, and then we need to commit this as well. And then next, if none of these scenarios have occurred, then we know we're adding a new note to our database. So we just need to create that item here. And I've just realized I made a mistake here, and that's that I've set the ID to not be nullable. We don't want to be providing an ID when we're creating a note. We want our database to do that. So I'm going to go ahead back to our model class and then put this as null. So note item And then on our ID, we want this to be nullable, as this will be created in our database. And because of that, this is going to flag up with an error, but we know this isn't going to be null at this stage, as we wouldn't have got here without the no ID being present. So we can put in the nullable operator here. So for the note item, the title will be note title.text-to-string, note text.text-to-string, and then the timestamp, we can get that from the datetime formatter. And we just call instant.now.toString, and that will give us a timestamp. And that needs to be outside these brackets. Okay, to get rid of this error, we just need to add another annotation, just saying that this app requires, or this section requires at least API level 26. And that will get rid of that error. And now we've created our note, we can call note listener.addNote and pass the note to that listener there. Just clean this up a bit. And that is it for the recycler view. And now we can go ahead and create the final class, which will be the main activity. So at the top of this class, we want to define some global variables so we can access this throughout the whole class. The first one is going to be a latent var, which would be our DB handler. So that would be notes database. And next we have the bin image. So we're going to call that notes bin. And this needs to be a type and not an assignment. And we just need a boolean just to say whether the note bin drawable is set. So it's note bin drawable set. We're going to initialize that to false, and that is because every time we drag a new note onto that bin, we don't want to keep resetting the image of that imagery, as that is quite a resource intensive process. So now in our onCreate, we can define our notes database. So notes database equals notes database, and then we just need to pass the context. And now we can start defining our views. So firstly, I want to access the floating action button. So I'm just going to call this the fab button. And to access this, it will be find view by ID. The type is floating action button, and then the ID is r.id.notes_fab. We want to set a click listener onto this. And from this click listener, we're going to open our dialog. So that will be val dialog equals note dialog. And then we can pass in the constructor arguments. The first argument is the listener, which will be our activity. And the next will be the note item. In this scenario, it's going to be null. And to get rid of that error, we need to implement that listener up here. And while we're here, we can also add the note click listener from our recycler view. And now we can implement the members, so add note, edit note, and the on click of the recycler view. And we'll fill these in later, So now we've defined our dialog, we just need to call dialog.show, and then we pass the support fragment manager, and then just a tag which I'm going to call add note. Then we can also define our bin image down here. So notes bin will be find view by ID, and the ID will be r.id.notes_bin. And then we can move on to define our drag listener. So a drag listener is an object that we can set onto an image view so that whenever the image view is dragged, that listener will be called, and then we can perform some specific logic for when this item is dragged. And I'm going to call that drag listener. And that will be view.onDragListener. And in here, we need to have a when function. And we'll be switching when.dragEvent.action. And this needs to return a Boolean. So I'm just going to start defining those now. And this needs to be inside the when function. So our first drag event will be when it's started dragging. So that is drag event.action drag started. And if that happens, we want to invalidate the view and then return true. Next we have drag event.drag location. That will just be true. And then drag event.drag exited. And that is going to be the same as this one up here. And then we have another one here, which is just true, which will be drag ended. And then we have the important one, which is action drop. So drag event.action drop. And this is when the user drags that note and then drop onto the bin image. And then from here, we can access the ID of that note. So val item equals event dot clip data, and then dot get item at 0, because we know it's the first item in that clip data, and we want that to return true at the end. And in here, we're going to be showing a dialog before we actually delete the image. So I'm just going to put in a comment for now before we create that. And then we can create this function here to show that delete dialog. So just give me some more space. So private fun show delete dialog. This will take a note ID. To call the builder to show the dialog. So val builder, this will be an alert dialog. This is a generic dialog which is used in many apps. So alert dialog dot builder, the context. Then we can call builder dot set message. and we will just say, are you sure you want to delete this note? And this will be cancelable, so if they click anywhere outside of this dialog, it will cancel the dialog and dismiss it. So that will be true. So now we can set our positive and negative actions. So if the user wants to delete the note, we can define deleting the note here, or if they want to cancel, we can also define that. So set positive button, the text for this will be yes, and then we can pass in the dialog click listener, and we can do this by calling object dialog interface dot on click listener, and then we need to open up some brackets and then implement the onClick method. And then when that's clicked, we can call our database and delete the note. I'm just going to store this in a result variable. So note database.delete note, and then pass in our note ID. And we just need to cast that to an int. And then we just need to check if that result returns greater than 0. If it has, then we know it's successful. And if it's been successful, we want to get notes from our DB, which is a function that I will create in a sec. And we want to show as host, just to say that a note has been deleted. Note has been deleted. And then we can pass in the length. And the context needs to be this at main activity. I'm just going to copy and paste this because we need it in the else case. So if it wasn't successful and it failed to delete the note, we just want to show that as a message. And we will just say error deleting note. And then we will call dialog.dismiss. And we can access that from PO, which is passed in the click interface. Then we have the negative action. We can define here, so set negative button. The text for this will be no. And then we need to pass in the objects again. And implement the members. And we would just call dialog.dismiss. So po.dismiss. You can of course change this parameter name to make it more easier. So dialog and then dialog.dismiss. And just run it with a null check, even though it's unlikely to be null. And then we can call .create and .show. And now I'm going to define the function to set up our Recyclerview. So that'll be private fun setup Recyclerview. And this will take a note list, so list and then list of note item. And firstly, we need to define our Recyclerview. And that'll be find view by ID, Recyclerview, and the ID, which was, and we didn't actually define ID for the Recyclerview, so I'm just going to define that now. So notes underscore Recyclerview. And then we need to make sure this Recyclerview uses a horizontal layout manager so that it scrolls horizontally. So that'll be RV Recyclerview dot layout manager equals linear layout manager. Then we can pass the context and then horizontal. And then false. And then we can set up the adapter. So Recyclerview.adapter equals notes adapter. And then we can pass the list, which is the parameter, and then the click listener, which will be the main activity. And this is showing an error here, and it's because we're sending a list item, but it's expecting a mutable list. But that's no problem because this will actually be sending an array list of no items that will get rid of the error. And then there's another function which we also need to create, which will be set bin drawable, because as I mentioned earlier, we only want to set the drawable for the bin once in the whole activity. There's no point keep resetting it and then using up resources. So that will be set bin drawable, and we're just going to check if the note bin drawable is not set, then we set it to true. And then we just set the image resource. So set image drawable, and that is context compat dot get drawable. Pass in the context and then our drawable. And then we can call this function in our show delete dialog. And then we have one final function to create, which is get notes from DB. So firstly, we're going to put our notes list into a variable. We're just going to call it notes database dot get notes, and then we're just going to call setup Recyclerview, and then pass in the notes. If it's empty, the Recyclerview will handle that. It will just show a empty list. And then we can call this in our delete dialog. So get notes from DB. And then we can also call this in our onCreate. So when the main activity is created, we want to fetch the notes from our database. And we need to call our delete dialog in the drag event.action.drop. So show delete dialog, and then we pass in the ID, and we can access the ID from item.text.toString. And now we just need to implement these functions down here, and that should be the main activity completed. So for the first one, add note, we will just call the notes database and access the add note function, and then pass the note item, and then call get notes from DB to refresh our Recyclerview. Similar thing for this function here will be notes database dot edit note, pass in the note, the title and the ID, and we call get notes from DB. And then finally, for the on click, we just need to create our dialog. So notes dialog, pass the context, and then the note item. And then we just need to call .show, pass the support fragment manager, and then a tag which will be edit note. And also guys, in the next videos I'll be showing you how we can use live data to observe the room database for any changes. So when we're editing or deleting notes, it will automatically get updated, and our Recyclerview or lazy column will show those notes. We don't have to keep calling this function. But as we're coding it in legacy standards at the moment, we do have to call that function every time there's been an update, because we want to get the latest version of our notes. And that should be everything completed, so we can now go ahead and run the app and test it and then make sure everything's okay. So before running this app, we just need to make sure that we add the launcher in the activity. So we just assign main activity as the default, and we can do that. I'm just going to copy and paste it, but you need to add in a intent filter. So if I just paste that in here, change the correct path, and that should be everything. We should be good to go. Right, we can see our apps come up here now. We've got our app bar, and we've got our bin and our fab button. So let's click on the fab button and see if we get that dialog. We get that dialog come up just now. So I'm just going to create a note with a body of test note. Click add note, and we can see we've got a slight issue here. The dialog isn't disappearing, so let's go and resolve that. So in our dialog, I can see what we've done here. We haven't put in the remove for the dialog, so we've only got it in for the edit mode, so the dialog won't close if we're just adding an item. So this function up here, we just need to copy and paste that down here, and then just rerun the app. Right, so you can see now the app is reloaded, and we can see the database is working because it's retrieved that note from the DB that we created. But I'm just going to add another note just to make sure that this dialog does actually close. And it does, we can see that worked. Now let's see if the drag and drop works. Right, we can see that shadow has been created, and we're now dragging the note. And if we drag it down to the bin image, which is where we set our drag listener. Okay, so it looks like we've got another issue, and it is because we actually forgot to set the drag listener, and that's probably just because we created the drag listener and then didn't go back to the main activities on create. So we can see here the drag listener isn't being used, but that can be easily fixed. So notes bin dot set drag listener or on drag listener, and then we can just pass it right there. Rerun the app for the second time, and hopefully this should all be okay. So I'm going to drag this note onto the bin, and then we can see our dialog comes up. I'm just going to select yes, and we can see the note was deleted. So that is creating a note and deleting the note. Let's see if we can edit. So we can come into here and then edit the title. So I'm just going to put 1 and then also edit the body. And then if we click save, we notice that the Recyclerview is refreshed, and we've now got the updated note. And we can drag this and then delete it here. The pop-up comes up and it says, are you sure you want to delete this note? We select yes, and we can see the image is now changed to the filled bin. So that is it for this app. In the next iteration of these videos, I'm going to be making this in Jetpack Compose with some other Jetpack libraries as well, such as Room, so you'll be able to see how we can make a modern app. So thank you for watching this video. Please like and comment, and